All right, we're going to try again here. So I want to welcome everybody to the SPIA Alumni Speaker Series. My name is Matt Auer. I'm the Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Georgia. And we love this series. We are delighted to be the guest today of the Metro Atlanta Chamber, the MAC. And we've enjoyed this morning kind of watching the weather, which has varied kind of minute to minute. So thank you for folks who've come in person to this session. Special thanks to our sponsors, Verizon and Georgia Power. The sponsorships that we receive are really key for us and important to the SPIA Alumni Board. They include our need-based undergraduate study abroad scholarship. So each year, it's really rewarding for me to be able to, I know where those funds are coming from, and it's from events like this, and it enables students to participate in study abroad that they otherwise might not be able to. And also provide internship stipends for our students in the Masters of Public Administration program. So thank you very much for that, Verizon, Georgia Power, and the SPIA Alumni Board for working hard on that. And Taylor Murray has been instrumental in putting together this speakers series event and working with the committee. So thank you for that, Taylor. So just some good housekeeping. If you're joining us online, this is a webinar, so you have to use the Q&A function. And I'm going to be moderating questions after the panelists have an opportunity to maybe answer a few questions I've already got for them. So I'm going to pull up my computer, and I'll be looking for your questions. So use the Q&A with the webinar. And I just also wanted to mention just a few different things. First of all, we're really proud of the fact that we've been ranked number 3 at SPIA this year. That's our highest ranking since, I think, 2004, or is it 14? I forget. I mean, the rankings, you go up, you go down, but we're always happy when we're up, and it's great to be in the top 5, and we have great company there. And alumni are a big part of that. They make us shine, and their support is essential. Whether it's their financial support, it's hiring our graduates from our programs. Some of our best employers are our alumni. So thank you so much for that. I also wanted to just mention that we have something called the Federal Policy Outlook series in Washington, D.C. And our first event's going to be on June 8th. So stay tuned for that. I think there's an opportunity to, either you can come to D.C., come up for that, or tune in virtually. Our guest is going to be Congressman Austin Scott. So we're looking forward to that. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. Caroline Davis is the Economic Development Manager for the City of Sandy Springs. She's a graduate of Leadership Sandy Springs and a current board member for the Sandy Springs Education Force. Caroline is a graduate of SPIA's Master of Public Administration program, and she holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Community and Leadership Development from the University of Kentucky. So welcome, Caroline. Nick Fernandez is the Senior Manager of Government Affairs here at the MAC. Prior to joining the MAC, Nick served as campaign manager for Attorney General Chris Carr's 2018 re-election campaign and as a policy advisor under the Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black, and also under State Senator Jeff Mullis. Nick is also a SPIA graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. Welcome, Nick. Scott Hilton is the Vice President of Commercial Banking at South State Bank. He previously served in the Georgia House of Representatives from 2017 to 2019, and he's running again for a seat in District 48. Scott earned a bachelor's degree with honors in finance and international business with a minor in psychology from Georgetown University and an MBA from Emory University. Scott. And Josh Stevens, oh, he's here. Okay, good. He was here before and then slipped out, now he's back, so that's good. Josh Stevens serves as the Director of Policy and Government Affairs at the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Previously, Josh served in other business development, economic development, or policy-related roles at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, Georgia Department of Economic Development, Greater Hall Chamber of Commerce, Georgia State Senate, and in construction business development. He's also a graduate of the University of Georgia with a degree in Family and Consumer Sciences. So with that, I think we'll get started if you guys are ready. All right. So let me just kind of start things by saying our session today is titled The Effect of 2022 Legislative Session on Georgia's economic recovery. And I kind of hope that folks can just sort of pause for a moment. And I always have this at the end of the legislative session, there's been a blizzard of all these bills that have passed, and it just all kind of blurs together. And so I'm so excited about this session because we're going to try to unpack some of what just went through the legislature and maybe is on the governor's desk or it's been signed to really kind of understand the impact on Georgia's economy. And so I'm delighted that we've got 4 experts with us who can help kind of illuminate that. So I've been looking forward to this session for a while. So we saw an amended 2022 fiscal year budget, which will return money to taxpayers as well as increase state employees' salaries. That's one of the most wonderful things, one of the most wonderful clauses I've read in a set of remarks in some time. How exciting is that? Money back to taxpayers, increasing state employee salaries. So that's a good start. Now, one can venture to guess that it will positively impact Georgia's economy. We get that. However, can you be specific about the likely impacts on Georgia's economy beyond simply seeing a boost to economic growth? We know that if people have more money in their pockets, they're going to spend some of that, and that leads to economic growth. We get that. But we're hoping for a bit more than that. So, for example, after the federal child tax credits were distributed monthly starting mid-year, what were examples of changes in spending that you observed? Did people primarily pay down personal debt? Did a lot of the funds end up in personal savings accounts instead of personal spending? So maybe you could speak to what you expect and maybe things that you've seen already. And with that, we don't really have an order. I mean, I guess if the spirit moves you, just please chime in.
Yeah, I could start with that one. Thanks for having us, Dean. Thank you to SPIA for hosting this and for being at Max. So thank you guys for being here. But yeah, so I talked to our economists here. So we're thankful to have a team that focuses on numbers around this. And I think some of the numbers that came back for the federal child tax credit was 32% of households use the money to spend on household expenses, directly put that money back into the economy. I think around 27% saved the dollar, so put that into their savings account, and then around 42% used that to pay off debt. So certainly we saw positive impacts with those dollars, with the money going back into households and going back into the economy, as well as paying down debt. And then I believe that maybe not so much the child tax credit, but certainly some of the economic impacts over the past 2 years were highlighted in Dr. Dorfman's presentation to the legislature. And I think for the first time ever, we had in the middle of a recession per se, or a defined recession, first time where more people were spending money than they were saving. So certainly we saw some great fiscal impacts from that, from the child tax credits, but certainly to your point, Dean, first time increased salaries for employees, COLAs for state agencies, increase in matches for state employees, certainly a lot of great macroeconomics and highlights from the budget this year.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having us here this afternoon. It's great to see you guys. I'm grateful for experts like you all who are in the policy. And it's always good to talk to the national champion Georgia Bulldogs here. I feel like I got to pander to the audience. From a banking perspective, so I've kind of straddled both the banking and policy worlds. From a banking standpoint, we are flush with cash right now, which from a banking standpoint is a problem. We make money when we loan money. And so one of our biggest competitors has been the federal government in terms of we have printed massive amounts of cash. So if you look at a graph of the money supply right now in the United States in response to COVID, good, wrong, or indifferent, we printed about $7 trillion in new money that's in the system floating around. And that's why you see the Fed doing what they're doing right now in terms of interest rate, which is essentially to put the brakes on that and kind of throw a wet blanket on the economy to cool it off a little bit. But yeah, there is a lot of cash out there that we're trying to figure out what to do with. From a specific Georgia standpoint, Georgia, only one constitutional requirement we have when you go down there. The only thing we've got to do is pass a balanced budget. And so philosophically, for the governor and leadership down there, there's one of two things they can do with it. They can grow state programs and invest in that, or return that money and to the citizens of Georgia. And they think they kind of, citizens of Georgia know best how to use and spend and go about handling that. And so that's been kind of the policy position that we've seen. And again, I don't think it's going to affect inflation one way or the other. It's still going to be high for the time being, for the next at least year or so.
Yeah. So something I think we might see at the local level, and this week is actually National Small Business Week. And in Fulton County, our Fulton County Board of Commissioners recognized this as Small Business Week, and the SBA, the head of the SBA, was here in Atlanta this week and told us that we are at a record high for the number of new small business starts. And so I think as more people have money in their pockets, they're going to try out different ventures, and that's going to impact smaller communities. We can talk about the impact of workforce maybe a little bit later, but I would venture to say that we'll probably see more people starting businesses when they have more money in their bank accounts.
You know, when you look at a $30.2 billion budget, you know, there's a lot of money there. And also taking into account federal funds as well, you're looking at $57 billion in spending. And yes, that's going to have a substantial impact. But if you look at what's going on across the economy from an employment standpoint, as well as unemployment rates that have been continually ticking down, I think we're at 3.1% right now, at least last month's numbers, which is a historical low, right? We've got people out working. For those that are seeking opportunities, there's opportunities for growth. And, you know, when you look at the impacts of those budgets, I'll exclude the macroeconomic factors just because that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. But from a state standpoint, those dollars are going into significant efforts in transportation, education, or other, especially economic development as well, which is the department entity that I represent. But we're only, you know, $32 million of the overall $30 billion. So the efforts and programs of our organization, but also sister agencies, are all working to continue to grow the economy as well. So you're going to continue to see jobs and investment growth, but also I know we've got a few questions on workforce and other too.
Yeah, in fact, we do. And so it's great to turn to that. And it occurs to me, I think some labor data at the federal level, national level came out this morning. I didn't have a chance to look at them, but we all know that the job market is really tight. There's something like 11 million jobs out there where employers are looking for workers. So labor shortages run across virtually every industry in the state of Georgia. Unemployment has consistently stayed in the low, as you said, Nick, 3 to 4% range for the past year, but we continue to see new jobs and investments come to the state, even as employers are looking for workers, and it's something of a seller's market, so to speak. So looking back on this last legislative session, were there any, in your view, particular bills that were aimed at solving this issue at the state level? And then if I can sort of channel employers' plea at this point, how long can we operate with companies struggling to find workers before it really begins to show in our economy the strains?
I'll start. So I think something Georgia does really well is utilize the Workforce and Opportunity Innovation Act. We have a lot of workforce programs in Georgia, and there were bills passed, one to provide gap financing for students who in their senior year of college or last year of a program to get that degree, to be qualified for those high-paying jobs, and then apprenticeship opportunities for high school students. And I know we're talking all the time about the industries coming into Georgia and how do we get them the talent that they need and creating programs for that. But as we upskill people into those jobs for the industries and companies that we're recruiting into Georgia, those people are leaving other fields. And so on the local level, the hit that we're kind of getting is that our service and hospitality businesses are really struggling to find talent. And I think coming out of the pandemic, people's patience is a little bit shorter with employees in those industries. And so people are just choosing to either leave the workforce or to go through one of these fantastic programs and to get a job. So I would say on a local level, our labor market is really tight. And I don't really know what we're doing at the state level to address those industries, but I think we're certainly gearing up to get the workforce we need for larger industries.
Yeah, I'll second Caroline's point on the gap funding. So we worked this past session on HB 1435. That was sponsored by Representative Chuck Martin and Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. And really that's something that here at MAC we've been working on extensively, which is the gap funding model. This comes from the Panther grant at Georgia State, and this is now a statewide model that will allow for students that up to $2,500 could apply for a grant, not a loan, a grant that can help them figure out that next gap, whether it be in their living expenses or books. But the state has put a huge investment in those students. That student has put an investment into their future, and to lose students at the last part of their career in school or lose that opportunity at a degree over $500 or $1,000 certainly shouldn't be occurring. So we're thankful to the legislature for passing that. The governor signed to that, I think either earlier this week or last week, I think last week. And then as well, the governor also provided with some funding last year, a pilot program to look at this as well. And we've seen the early preliminary data from that show that the average grant is around $1,000. So $1,000 should not separate someone from earning a degree, entering the workforce. And so thank you for highlighting that, Caroline. Another one I'll hit on that's been huge for workforce, and I've got one more too, is CAPS funding. So I think through the pandemic, many of the parents in the room, parents on this panel can tell you about the importance of childcare and quality childcare. So here at MAC, we've studied childcare and we've studied the impacts that has on the economy here in the state of Georgia, as well as state revenues. And we found that the lack of quality childcare has an economic impact of about 1.5 billion. As well as a lost state revenues of 100 million. And so this year with the governor's help and the legislature's support, had added an additional 10 million, I believe, for CAPS funding, which means that an additional 23,000 children can enter into CAPS. And so this is 23,000 children that come from a low-income family and parents now that have quality childcare. So whether it's that they have to take time off from work, whether they have to drop from full-time to part-time, completely leave the workforce, or now an opportunity to re-enter the workforce. This should hopefully give employers a couple opportunities at an additional boost in workforce, and also help retain a lot of those employees. So just thankful for those two things, one in the budget, one in the legislature in 1435.
Yeah, so I'm in commercial banking, so I tell my kids my job's like Shark Tank, right? Like, so I meet with companies, I hear what they do, and it's a blast. It's a lot. So if anybody's looking to get into banking, highly recommend. But I meet with business owners every single day, and it's amazing to hear stories of like, I've got to interview 10 folks to maybe get one, and I'll hire him, and the day he's supposed to show up, he found another job elsewhere and he's gone. You know, I was talking to a guy this morning, he's paying his drivers. He used to pay them like $8, $9, $10 an hour. He's up to 23 an hour now. And I mean, a guy comes in, he's like, I'm getting 30 from the company next door. Boom, you know, I'll give you that just to keep them. I mean, it's wild out there right now. And it is trickling into they service the restaurant industry. So that gets more expensive down the road. There's been a great migration, right? Like, all of us kind of have this wake up, like, do I like what I'm doing? And you see this kind of great resignation of people leaving jobs and either not going back to the workforce or starting their own kind of thing. One of the things that we don't really tie to labor that we did this session was like rural broadband development, right? Like, the reality is we kind of live in two Georgias. There's Metro Atlanta and then the rest of Georgia. Well, people woke up and said, Gabe, I don't have to work in Atlanta. I don't have to work in New York. I don't have to work in California. I can work wherever I want, you know, and traveling the state, there's some rural communities in Georgia that are really seeking economic development. I think we get broadband out to them. That's a great opportunity for them to develop a whole workforce there. Work for Google from home in Valdosta or Vidalia or wherever, So that's a big kind of infrastructure thing that I think will help kind of smooth out workforce and some of those issues that we're facing in the state.
I'll just add that on behalf of the Department of Economic Development, the activities that we're doing, trying to bring jobs and investment to the state, I will say that it's going to be a continuing trend. We're going to have more and more jobs and investment coming to the state from all over the world, and allowing people to get the skills to either move on to new opportunities or, find new opportunities with other organizations in the same role is something that's going to continue for a while. And it is a multifaceted issue when it comes to labor shortages and workforce issues. But I will say that things look great, and we are continuing as the department. And, we're a stat keeper, but we're also working day to day with companies all over the world that are looking at expansion opportunities and new opportunities for job creation within the state. So last fiscal year, we announced about 33,000 jobs. Well, 9 months into this fiscal year, we're already at 35,000 jobs. So we're going to continue to see a substantial amount of jobs and opportunities for Georgians. So we do need to continue finding ways to get those folks and to employ those jobs that the companies are coming here to fill.
I got to put a plug in too for our technical college here in Georgia. We have something like 18 different degrees that you can essentially get free of charge.
Yep.
And get into, you want to be a welder, you can go free of charge, make six figures. That's the best deal we got going around. And I just think we need to do a better job of getting that out there to folks.
Yeah, the high demand careers.
Yeah.
Truck drivers, nurses, all sorts of other strategic and needed positions as well.
And Dean, I'll answer your question about kind of employers. And I know this isn't a perfect answer for employers, but it kind of shows how long-term effects through the budget, through state government. But one of the biggest fields that we know out there from employers that jobs are not going filled is computer science and coding jobs and engineering jobs. And we 2 years ago worked with the legislature on funding for the first time for computer science in the classroom, in twofold: one for computer science funding for the student, and then also for the teachers. We noticed that there was an inadequate number of teachers that could go out and teach those computer science, be in the classroom, be able to teach those courses. And so with a lot of support from the legislature, Lieutenant Governor Duncan, the governor, we've put money in for funding that has brought us up to, I think, around 650 teachers now that can teach computer science courses. And then hopefully in the long term, from building that foundation, I know it's not a great answer for employers because they need employees now, but hopefully here in 3, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, we will have seen the effects of that investment in those students, and hopefully seeing more Georgia students staying here, filling those jobs, and helping lead to an increase in computer science employees. So,
the answers to that question. And Nick, you had mentioned HB 1435. And shift gears and talk about HB 1437. So not necessarily just for you, but the whole panel. HB 1437 provides a $1 billion tax cut by changing the current progressive income tax rate from a maximum of 5.75% to a flat 4.99%. It eliminates deductions except for charitable donations, and it significantly expands standard exemptions. What impact do you think this will have in Georgia's economy? Can you speak to the potential trade-offs of the tax cut from the perspective of different income levels? So we're talking about high wealth versus, let's say, middle income, lower income individuals and families, particularly with respect to how the flat tax provision works. Which filers will enjoy the greatest benefits from the flat tax provision?
Yeah, I can start us off. So certainly that it was a main priority of the legislature this year for the tax cut, and then even to the first tax cut that was implemented back in 2018. That certainly allowed for the legislature to potentially drop it down to 5.5, allow them to come back Obviously, the legislature decided not to. We had just entered the COVID-19 pandemic and chose to keep it at 5.75. But yeah, through the process, we've seen that eventually, based on a certain number of factors and performance indicators that have to be hit, that could certainly go to 4.99. From the chamber's perspective, obviously, that loss of revenue is going to have to be made up somewhere, whether it's budget cuts through agencies. But from our perspective, our biggest, what we're looking at over the next couple of years is how the legislature approaches filling that gap, whether it be through changes to current tax credit programs, tax incentives. We certainly saw this year an effort to cap the film tax credit, as well as eliminate the transferability of it. So we're certainly hyper aware of those and what that landscape's going to look like in the future as we continue to knock down 0.1% every year. So really just going down, seeing what's going to fill that gap, and seeing what tax credit programs are, potentially on the cutting block and what we need to go in and affect. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our tax credit programs have had humongous impacts on our state, film tax being one, but a smaller one that we worked on this year renewed the high-tech exemption, which as well as the high-tech exemption on data centers. We're the #2 state in the nation for data centers construction, and I think the #1 leading state for current construction for data centers. So that's a tax credit program that certainly has shown the benefits. And we defended this session along with many of our key partners, and certainly looking in the next futures to see what else comes up in regards to revenue and tax credits.
Yeah, I think it's just awesome that we're even in a position to be talking about tax credits, right? So like there's some states right now who are increasing taxes because their economies have not fully recovered. And here Georgia is decreasing it by $1 billion. So think about this. We're bordered by 2 states that don't have an income tax. So there's a lot of competitive pressure when we're thinking about economic development and bringing companies in here. I like kind of a fair and equitable tax code. One of the frustrating things for me as a legislator is I would get in there and I was a conservative and we're going to reduce taxes. And then you come to find out we're really just, and this is probably a non-chamber answer, creating exemptions for different folks in different industries. And I was all for that. But then all of a sudden it just kind of was like, we're doing it because you got a better lobbyist than you do, And so I like kind of a flat where, hey, everyone, same ticket to the dance, pays the same amount. And I'd love to see that both from a business. I think it just makes it easier for businesses and individuals to understand. Yeah, there's still a lot of things with our tax code we got to clean up. But Georgia is I think we're 40th in tax per capita. So we're very competitive as a state and we're rewarded as such with folks coming in. I'll tell you the position, and we haven't talked about it yet, and I'd like to get into it a little bit more. The reason we are where we are is because we found that delicate balance between lives and livelihood in COVID and went ahead and opened up and welcomed business. And man, we are just busting at the seams right now. I mean, Josh could probably talk about, we've had some huge economic development wins that then in turn allows us to return some of that money back to taxpayers. And it's because we struck that right balance between reopening after COVID.
Absolutely.
Tee you up, brother.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's perfect tee up. But, when you talk about a tax code, it's always a very loaded subject, right? But one of the things that Nick mentioned, of course, is that within the tax cut bill itself, it is a fairly measured approach and it does have certain trigger points, but it does account for a certain amount of revenue growth over that period too. So while you do often have to have closure of exemptions and things like that, it's not always the case, which are some of the programs that we currently market to employers and other. But generally speaking, when you look at revenues and where they come from, by and large, about 50%, maybe a little more, comes from individuals, not the corporate tax cut, not the corporate tax rate. Generally speaking, companies don't pay a large percentage of the overall mix. So it really is about the individuals. And if you can lower the taxes on individuals, then hopefully there's more spending and therefore growth and taxes within the sales and other things and the multipliers that come along with that. But we have continued to see revenue growth for sure. If you look at the last 3 or 4 months, and I think I I did write this down, so I'm cheating a little bit, but $3.5 billion up right now as far as forecasted revenue. So that's through 3/4 of the year coming up. So $3.5 billion. So they are taking a pretty measured approach and looking at tax cuts. And of course, that's a good thing for individuals and businesses.
No, I would just echo that it is a good thing for individuals and businesses. I think they have all of the hard data points, but I'm just looking forward to people having more money in their pockets and spending that money at our local businesses.
Spend it in Sandy Springs.
Specifically.
So I know some progressive economy. If I don't come back to the second part of the question, which is who benefits the most from this, from an income level perspective. So particularly the flat tax dimension of it, the view, generally speaking, going back all the way to Steve Forbes when he was running for president, we're gonna have a flat tax. And the complaint there is that, yeah, but that's progressive. I mean, what do we say about that?
I'd say, well, I'm not a tax policy expert. You know, when it comes down to individual taxation and others, I know it depends on each individual circumstances, of course. And when you lower the rate and then you increase the exemptions, you've increased the amount of income that one would not be taxed on, right? There's winners and losers in every tax rate. I personally don't know and have not seen nor studied the impact on different groups. I'm looking at it mostly personally from a business standpoint in the corporate tax rate as it relates to overall cost of doing business environment in the state. So
I think we need someone from Terry College of Business to answer that question.
I was gonna knock it out. I think it's the middle class, right? So the wealthy, right? They're not making the bulk of their wealth is not derived from income. It is coming from investment results, things like that. With the exemptions, yeah, if you're under the middle class, you're not paying. You know, we've got exemptions fairly high, so you're not paying tax. So it's the middle class who in Georgia is going to benefit the most from us bringing down the rate.
That reminds me of the Steve Forbes response. So,
I got a future.
more or less work for him. So. Okay, well, great. Thank you. So there have been some infrastructure investment bills this past session, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act, the fund investments, and specifically we're talking about broadband as well as water and sewer. Wondering if some of you can speak about the impact of these decisions and investments, what impact they'll have on Georgia's economy. And what about on a real local level? Are we seeing any particular examples here, or do you expect that we'll see that going forward?
Can you say that again, Dean?
Yeah, a repeat. So, thinking about the likes of the American Rescue Plan, the ARPA fund investments, and also some of the infrastructure investment bills that went through the legislative session this past year, and things like broadband, water, sewer. Can you speak about some of the expected impacts that some of these decisions and some of these resources will have on Georgia's economy, particularly at the local level?
So I can talk about infrastructure at the local level. The actual legislative bills, I might leave to our legislative friend on the panel. But I think infrastructure, what we're seeing is roads. We're seeing, and really, I can just talk about Sandy Springs. So we enjoy 285 and 400 and that beautiful interchange that if anyone is local to this area, I'm sure you've gotten stuck in traffic there. But really, what we're doing infrastructure-wise on the local level to support what the state is doing and the federal dollars that are coming in, we're working on the local roadways, and that supports really those larger projects that are happening, the 285s and 400s and 85 and the top-end projects and the express lane. So what we can do on a local level through maybe like T-Splost is help just facilitate traffic through. So
That's
kind of
that's music to everybody's ears. So you're talking about public
Yes.
transportation.
Just don't ask me when the project's going to end.
Go ahead,
That's
Josh.
not my job.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of comments. Maybe that'll tee it up a little differently. But so you've got about $4.8 billion in American Rescue Plan funds that are considered state fiscal recovery funds, and they're at the discretion of the governor. The governor created 3 different committees to evaluate the way that those dollars would be spent and allocated, et cetera. Water, sewer, infrastructure, along those lines. Then you've got broadband, and then you have a negative economic impact. To date, about 820 million or so, 825 million has already been announced. About 400 million for broadband, and then I think about 420 or so for water sewer. So you've got one-time funds of $4.8 billion when your budget is, as we've talked about in state funds, $30 billion. So that's a pretty substantial one-time influx of dollars, and they will have an impact for sure in communities all throughout the state. And I know that the committees involved in those have taken a very thoughtful approach in trying to make those decisions that will significantly impact, especially water sewer for industrial and commercial or other growth around the state, broadband investments, as Scott's already mentioned, in strategic locations. And that's just like a spider web that goes all over the state. There's state dollars that were already being invested there as well before this one-time influx. So they're absolutely going to have an impact, and positively at that.
Yeah. And I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's exciting. It's a lot of money. I go back to that $7 trillion that is just, we're in the first few innings of it being released. And that's why I think we're going to continue to struggle with inflation, it's interesting. I think about so I live in the city of Peachtree Corners. We have the largest city in Gwinnett. We've got 48,000 people, and our annual budget for the city is 12 million. The city got 9 million in ARPA funds. And so it's like Brewster's Millions. They don't know what to, it's a great movie, by the way. You guys are too young for, but it's they don't know what to do with it. I mean, they're going to spend it, the right way on infrastructure and stuff like that. But it is a significant amount of money just for our little city. And then you kind of multiply that on a statewide basis. So it's good for the economy. It's going to spur the economy. But I think just holistically, our reaction to COVID from a policy perspective was we took a sledgehammer to something that just needed a regular hammer. And I think we're going to pay the impacts of that for a little while from a policy perspective.
Yeah. Certainly to Scott's point, I mean, it doesn't feel like it right now, but I mean, we are living in essentially what is New Deal 2.0 with as much money that's flowing through. And I remember talking to a legislator who was a part of those committees, and they said the best thing I can do right now is just go back and read books about the New Deal and maybe bring some perspective to what was done there, how those funds were distributed, and because that's really the only reference they had for it as they were staring at distributing $800 million to the state. So, and certainly we're going to see a lot of direct and indirect effects of this positively. So, especially as Josh mentioned, for a lot of the funds that are flowing out to rural areas, you're certainly going to see some of your construction companies, your subcontractors, your contractors, especially around water and sewer and rural broadband, really seeing some great economic growth from that. And then to the rural broadband, I mean, that's a huge component and one that's been a focus of the legislature. And to have these, hundreds of millions of dollars come down and not have to look at maybe potentially a new tax or look at potentially some type of new revenue source, and to have these dollars to use, I think was huge and timely for the legislature as they were staring at, years of investment going into rural broadband. So really excited and interested to see how the ARPA funds play out in the next couple of years and see the effects of those over decades of generations.
If you're looking to start a business, start a construction company. One of my clients at the bank is a minority-owned construction company, and he is just, he's set for the next 5 years, because there's just so much coming his way. It's good. It's good.
So I brought my computer over to monitor Q&A. So Scott, I do have one for you. You actually kind of alluded to this before with the Fed unwinding some of its bond portfolio and interest rates increasing. Wondering, from a commercial banking perspective, and then kind of ramifying out to the state, what do you expect the implications are going to be just moving forward into the rest of this fiscal year and calendar year?
Yeah, so we've kind of gone through 3 stages. The first one was kind of PPP, EIDL, all these programs to kind of help folks out. Companies had a ton of money on their balance sheets that they didn't have anything to do with. So they just started to buy forward inventory. Inventory was getting more expensive. Well, they put all this money into inventory, creating kind of a supply chain issue. And now China's starting to kind of shut down a little bit more again due to COVID. So it's exacerbating that issue. They kind of ran through that first tranche of money. Then they go to bank lending, we lend them money, and now rates are going up. So companies are going to pull back on their inventory spending, and that'll solve the supply chain issue, but that'll kind of contract the economy here. So we think the Fed's going to raise probably this year another 50 to 75 basis points. I mean, the 30-year mortgage rates now are over 5.3, so home prices are going to start to go down. The economy got overheated because of all the spending, and now we're trying to cool it down. And so the Fed's trying to find this happy. They want to see 2% inflation. Right now, we're averaging somewhere around 7 to 8. So we got a ways to go. But that's kind of their strategy at a national level.
Okay, that's a perfect segue to the next question, which is wondering to what extent you guys are awake at night because of inflation. Let's assume for a moment that the Fed isn't as successful at tamping down inflation as they hope to be. What are the implications for Georgia's economy moving forward if we continue to have this steady inflation at 7-8%?
I don't know a small business owner that sleeps peacefully through the night. All I hear, and this is particularly like restaurants, I know a bakery, I think sugar went up like 300%. Their costs are just so high that even if they raise their prices, the cost of the supplies just goes up again. So absolutely trying to find ways to just make their daily doing business a little bit easier, and interested to see what the Fed's impact will be there. But on their behalf, I don't sleep that well either.
What keeps me up at night, seniors who are on a fixed income who, 8% is pretty meaningful. Lower income families who, I was filling up with gas last night. It was $70. It's like, my wife and I, it's a hit, but it's not, so people are going to start to change their lives and livelihoods. It's painful to watch. And I think about, okay, what can I do as somebody who's running for office here in Georgia to make things cheaper and more efficient? One of the things the governor had me doing when I was working for him was eliminating red tape. So if we can take costs out of the system, at least here locally, I think that's good. If we can take some friction out of the system from a red tape standpoint, that's always a good thing. I think about our port. We have a massive port and airport here. Those are huge resources for us here in Georgia. If we can get those running even more efficient than they are, drive even more traffic through those, get more goods here to the state, hopefully that'll lower costs for families. But we got to start to find local solutions to some of these issues.
We get a question from here. I think we might have a mic that's also available so people can hear this one.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your perspectives. I've really learned a lot, and I feel like I have a lot more to think about after leaving. My question is in response to what you guys were talking about regarding the federal spending. So my current job, I've been responsible for managing the city of Atlanta's allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funds. And it's been really challenging to spend all that money, just like you guys were talking about. Of course, there's lots of needs, but of course, with federal dollars also comes federal requirements. And as we get the rest of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, as the bipartisan infrastructure legislature comes through, what can the state of Georgia, local governments, even people in general do to prepare to be able to spend and get access to those funds as their businesses? Because I think there are a lot of businesses that would like to have access to the funding, but they don't necessarily know how to start and how to meet those requirements.
That is a great question. But I will say, I think it all does come back to the strings that are attached, right? I mean, those are guidelines that dictate how and when and to whom you can encumber or spend those funds. And I'm not as informed on the level of details and how in which some of those dollars could be going to private groups or companies or entities, et cetera. But I do know that there will be a lot, as you said, another allocation coming through. So the strings that are attached are tough, but those are not, I guess they're not a Georgia specific problem. Everybody's going to have them. But looking at case studies from other states in which other big cities, other capital cities throughout the country in which they've done it, learning lessons, of course, and speaking with those that are working throughout the state on these funds as well for different cities. There are ways in which you can seek flexibility, but a lot of times those have to be approved, of course, and go through a federal process. So
I think what Scott said about it's a great time to start a construction business because of the ways that I think a lot of these dollars will get spent. That's going to mean projects and construction and roads and things. And so I think that industry just by nature will end up seeing a lot of those dollars coming through. And then every now and then you may get a grant program. Samir, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that ARPA funds for, yes. So for example, Select Fulton is facilitating a grant program for businesses, a loan program with a low interest rate for small businesses through ARPA funds. So some entities are still choosing to do that. I think some are still deciding if that makes sense for them because that is a cumbersome process because that process then has to adhere to the ARPA requirements and guidelines, as you mentioned. But yeah, great time for construction.
Yeah, as a taxpayer, I want it to be easy to be known about, but hard to get. I don't mind this.
Had a plan in place, and then all of a sudden rules changed and they found themselves in a different position or
So that's the challenge you've got is getting to them.
I mean, we don't administer anything around ARPA, anything, but I mean, I can tell you here at the chamber. At the chamber on the legalization of online mobile sports betting. And so that's probably one of our biggest issues that was left on the table this year. And that's really threefold for us as the chamber and from an economy standpoint. So one, it provides around probably an additional 500 to or 50 to $100 million in revenue that could potentially go into Hope Scholarship, or could go for a long-term funding source for needs-based as well, or gap funding. So I know the legislature in many variations have looked at that as a possible funding source, as well as something here in the chamber. We host or house the Atlanta Sports Council. And so we've looked at potentially a long-term funding source through licensing fees of sports betting or revenues to go towards hosting those long-term funding events. I know those online can't see, but we've got the beautiful Mercedes-Benz right there. That's been the host of Super Bowl, been the host of national championships, should have been the host of the 2020 Final Four, but unfortunately lost that to COVID. So we have such a great sports community here. And so legalizing online sports betting would help bring potentially more future events to the state, to the Atlanta, as well as be a huge component for fan engagement for those teams and for the associations and leagues moving forward. So
whoever said City of Buckhead, I'm not going to touch that one, but what I will talk about is small business. I'm absolutely passionate about that. 70% of all Georgians here in our state are employed by a small business. We've got to do more for them. We talk about the tax code. So we have an inventory tax here in Georgia on 1231. Whatever your inventory is, you get taxed on that. We have small business owners that take a truck over to Florida, park it for a day, bring it back to. I mean, so it's silly stuff like that we've got to get cleaned up. Our regulatory code in Georgia has expanded exponentially over the last 30, 40 years. I think there's some number of 48,000 times in our regulatory code. It says prohibited, may not, must not, shall not. Those are all regulations that we can look at and clean up. And we need to lift up that rock and do that because, again, small business is the economic engine of Georgia. And the extent we can get that going, the better for our economy as a whole.
Since you talked about small business, I'll talk about something else that mattered a lot to, so something that mattered a lot to Sandy Springs this year and our mayor and a lot of other communities that I have colleagues that work in is housing and home ownership. And something that was much talked about, I think, is how some REITs have started buying up single family housing and turning them into rental housing. So I don't know what will come from that in the future, but I know that was a big discussion this year, and I fully expect that to be back next year.
Yeah, actually, maybe we could actually, we're getting towards the end of the hour, but that's a really good point, Caroline. And there's been a lot
to people. I think that's something that we're all trying to figure out, and whoever gets there first gets the gold sticker. But I know that something that, on the local side, a tool that we have would be our development authorities. And so if there's like a mixed use project and you are bringing jobs into our community, but you are also probably creating either apartments or condos or some other type of maybe rental housing, which can be a segue into home ownership. But we absolutely have to figure out what are the appropriate tools and where can those tools be appropriately deployed? And again, gold star to who gets the right answer first.
Yeah, and I don't think we've totally figured out transportation either, right? Like you can have affordable housing here, but if your job is over here, it doesn't really matter and it's not really affordable, So I think it's a continuum of that ecosystem. We got to figure it out.
Well, and I think that's where infrastructure and transportation absolutely makes a difference. Sandy Springs, we have 107,000 people commute into our city for work every single day. So that really makes a difference for our local residents. And the people who are coming in are the first responders, the teachers, the nurses and hospital workers, because we have 3 hospitals. So we have to figure out, how do we make our community, Metro Atlanta, affordable for the people that we need to work for the companies that are coming in.
Well, so we do have to kind of end things, and I appreciate questions that people have sent to us. And to our panelists, I am struck kind of with all the questions and answers, kind of to Scott's earlier point. There's this quality of dynamism right now in Georgia. I mean, all of the things that we might actually identify as challenges are actually opportunities, and they're opportunities for our students at the School of Public and International Affairs. So you should come to us. Maybe we can train up those students to deal with some of these puzzles to get us even further along the path. But thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you again to the Metro Chamber for this fabulous session this morning. And with that, maybe for folks who are here and online, if you could give a round of applause for our panelists. I think I also have some parting notes here. Well, I don't know what they were, but they would be to take the form of stay tuned, check our events calendar, because we have more things to come, including that June 8th Federal Policy Outlook session that we'll have, and that will be fun with Congressman